Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's main event. In this corner, aging in at 45 plus and 10 million strong, we've got the Boomers. The undisputed wealthiest generation, but the jabs keep coming. 30% have less than $100,000 in retirement savings. So they're going to stay in the ring way past the traditional retirement age of 65. And in this corner, aging in at between 20 and 30 and numbering 9 million plus, the millennials. Education? Boy, do they have it. Pound for pound, the best educated generation in history. But they're on the ropes facing an unemployment rate of over 12%. Lucky for them, they have your basement. Yes, 30% of millennials are living at home and blaming their problems on us. You can count on the fight of the century. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, The Zoomer with Conrad Black and Denise Donlan.
Thank you for joining us. I think we have a great show today.
I think so, too. Today in the Zoomer, my interview with Bob Rae, who talks about Justin Trudeau, Michael Ignatieff, and his current work.
Absolutely, and we've got some magic in the kitchen with Bob Blumer. And around the table, we'll be discussing the generational divide with Boomer expert David Kravitz and millennials Sandra Hudson and Aaron McCauley, and my new hero, Audrey Tobias. So unless you're under a rock, you've seen all the headlines. Audrey is an 89-year-old veteran who is just acquitted in a Toronto court of not filling out her census form. I didn't know we still had those things. And the hero part comes in here. Audrey objected to the fact that Lockheed Martin, the world's largest defense contractor, supplied the software for processing the Canadian census data. And that was deep info, Audrey, so congratulations on figuring that out. How did you know the provenance of the software? How did you know where it was made?
We're speaking of the 2011 census, by the way. I knew because somebody told me. And the person who told me was yet another member of Veterans Against Nuclear Arms. You're quite right, it was not well known. But people like us, veterans and nuclear, find out these things because we're keen. We are committed to not only to the abolition of nuclear arms by mutual agreement and discussion over time, but using peaceful solutions through the United Nations to solve international problems. And here, the largest manufacturer in the world, who has branched into information technology, I was amazed that our government chose such a company. When, number one, we're known for our high-tech companies. We have several very good high-tech companies in Canada. And taking it, not only that, but to a foreign country, I thought was unacceptable.
And you could have gone to jail.
Apparently.
Audrey, I want to start by saying that I have the utmost admiration for anyone who opposes prosecutors. As a group, they're a menace to society, and I congratulate you. But you just said you were not, in fact, these 30 years, a unilateral disarmer, and Lockheed Martin doesn't make nuclear weapons. So what is your objection to them?
We all go beyond nuclear weapons, any weapons at all. For example, the F-35, which our country is now in danger of buying. And true, we do need search and rescue replacements. But why do we need one that's covered with military armaments and all sorts of things? We need just a plain search and rescue. And some of us do not want our country to buy F-35 made by Lockheed Martin. There's one example.
Well, Lockheed Martin, as I understand it, made, in 2009, they made $38.4 billion from Pentagon contracts. So, you know, when you...
That wouldn't be the profit. That would be the sales.
That would be the sales. But still, that's a lot of money on aircraft and on missiles and on electronics, et cetera.
But it's really none of our business what the United States spends on defense. And in fairness to them, and I'm not exactly, as is notorious, a flag-waving, compulsive pro-American, but they have generally handled the defense of the West quite capably. And they have, under successive administrations from Mr. Nixon on, negotiated just what you said, Audrey. They have negotiated bilateral or multilateral arms reductions quite conscientiously, starting with SALT I and right through the reduction talks.
But at the end of the day, it was an ethical decision. That was your line in the sand, and you made an ethical decision, and you stood up for your principles. And well done, I say, well done. Okay, so we're going to continue with news for a minute. Conrad, don't you love it when the phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning? It's usually something bad, right?
Well, I have it rigged so I don't normally hear it, and yes, it usually is bad. Or a drunk, a crank call, wrong number.
Well, guess what it was for Alice Munro. The 82-year-old Canadian short story writer got one Thursday morning from the Nobel the Nobel Prize Committee, just talking about peace, in Stockholm, informing her that she'd won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And a little prize money, too, I might add.
I think it's a wonderful thing. I was always astounded and disappointed that Canadian authors weren't so rewarded. I particularly thought Mordecai richly deserved to be. And this is a first for us. You know, Guatemala has 2, I think. Iceland has 1. Nothing against them, but it's been a long time for that committee to recognize a Canadian, but she's a very deserving recipient.
Well, she is. Congrats to Alice. And the great thing about Alice, of course, is when you get a prize like that, it puts a real focus on Canadian literature. And I know when people around the world are going to start digging into Alice Munro books, they're going to find beautiful stories about writers and farmers and teachers and librarians. And I think that just looks damn good on us, I got to say.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well done. Yeah. The other thing I'll pull to everyone's attention is, speaking of great Canadians, we just lost one. And Paul Demer is a friend of yours, I understand, Conrad.
A friend for 47 years.
You've written an article in here.
Yeah, and he was an admirable person in every way. Very generous, completely unpretentious. Of course, he became an extremely wealthy man, but he did not start out that way. And nothing changed him or altered his good nature and his very informal, open, accessible personality. It always a tremendous sense of humor. I saw him just a few weeks ago, and of course he was not well, but there was not a hint of self-pity or irritation or fear or anything. It was the same old Paul I've known all these years, and he also a very cultured man, to largely an autodidact, but he built a house in the immense property that he has in northern Quebec that I think is the greatest treasure in Canada. It is a magnificent house. He didn't build it to impress anyone. He built it because of his interest in architecture.
And hung a lot of great art in it too, I understand. I mean, you know, the great thing about leaving a legacy is, in this case, he's well known for his philanthropic endeavors. He gave to hospitals and to universities and lots of artistic organizations.
He was a courageous federalist in a separatist part of Quebec, and an enlightened capitalist, and he left not only the legacy of his great philanthropy, but also a splendid corporation that was a hodgepodge when he took control of it.
I love that he grew up in Sudbury speaking French and learned English playing pool. Did you ever play pool with him?
No, cards, but not pool.
Cards, okay. Did you win?
The stakes weren't large.
Oh, okay. Don't go away. We're going to be back in a few minutes with Age Rage and a couple of Bobs, Rae and Blumer. Okay, the money goes here. No tipping.
Where's the business class?
I'm a millennial, and I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry.
We suck, and we know it.
We're self-centered. We're entitled. We're narcissistic, lazy, and immature.
We're the worst. If only we could be more like our parents.
Yeah, the baby boomers. You guys were great.
He gave us great music.
60s counterculture.
Psychedelic drugs.
A lot of great movies, too.
You raised us to believe that we were special.
So special that we didn't even have to do anything to earn it.
You tried your best. You insisted we all go to college, and now we're the most educated generation in American history.
Sure, college costs 600% more than it did when you went, and yes, we averaged like $30,000 in student loan debt.
But here we go again, making excuses. We're so lazy.
Instead of living in our parents' basements and waiting tables, we should just go and get real jobs, like you did.
I mean, not a job in manufacturing since those all got outsourced in the 90s.
We graduated into a recession, and 90% of the jobs created since 2009 are part-time. But let's be honest, we just don't like hard work.
Hey, what was the deal with that recession anyway?
I think it had something to do with the housing bubble that started in the 90s. I don't know, I was still pretty young back then.
Oh, and we're really sorry about messing up those 2 wars you guys started.
I mean, it's not like we jacked up college tuition prices or
Destroyed the manufacturing industry.
gutted the unions.
Destroyed the global economy.
And left our offspring with an environmentally devastated planet stripped of its natural resources.
Man, it'd be crazy if there was a generation that recklessly awful, huh?
But we do text too much. Ugh.
I know, right?
So on behalf of all the millennials, we'd like to apologize for being so terrible. From now on, we're gonna be just like the baby boomers.
Because you guys, you nailed it.
Sandy, let's start with you.
Sure.
You're the executive director of a student union. You're a millennial. You work with lots of millennials. And, you know, millennials have been stereotyped as narcissistic, lazy, entitled. Do you agree with that?
No.
I don't expect so. No.
No, I don't. I think that a lot of that has been, I think it's an interesting media story that the media has kind of ballooned into something that it's not. I think that my generation is just as hardworking as any other generation and wants to have purpose just like any other generation and is trying the best that we can, but we have a lot of unique challenges as well.
I have to say, I'm in great sympathy with those who criticize the boomers. I am one of them, and I am probably the only boomer any or 90% of the viewers would ever meet who, for example, did not protest the Vietnam War. I always thought that most of my peers, or at least contemporaries, who really did protest with respect, Sandy, a lot more than your age group does, at least in this country. I thought, I never agreed with any of it. And so I don't think you should take any flack like this. And I think you're right. I mean, that doesn't mean I agree with the student protesters we have now, but I think you're absolutely right. Don't take any condescending, pompous claptrap from the people one generation older than you.
No, I won't. Don't worry, no,
She's taking anything over there. I think she can handle it.
No, yeah, that's right.
The millennials are the first generation to fail to hit traditional benchmarks of the emergence into adulthood on such a large scale. So naturally, the search for the reasons goes all over the place. Is it something inherently wrong with them? Is it just bad timing? Is it just, we can get into all that, but I don't think you can separate the style points from the results in the real world that the millennials are suffering from. I think the two are intimately connected, and I think that's what's causing all this tumult, and I agree that the war is more rhetorical than substantive, but it's quite intense.
Yeah, isn't it basically an economic problem? I mean, there are just too many people engaged in work that doesn't add value. We had an aversion to blue-collar work. Everyone wanted to do white-collar work, and we got over-urbanized and over-focused on things that don't actually generate the kind of income you need to spread it around so you don't have the backsliding statistically that you're speaking.
But now take that and multiply it by those people are not retiring on schedule.
But I don't think that's the majority of the problem. I think for the first time, our generation has grown up with the fact that it's no longer that you graduate high school and you find a job and then you start a career. It's being ingrained in almost everybody that you go to post-secondary education. So what type of jobs are expected out of post-secondary education? White-collared, highly skilled, and not blue-collared with practical skill type jobs. It's a prestige thing. You go to college, you go to university, but our economy can't support all those types of jobs. So it's not just people retiring, because there's never that many jobs to begin with, right? White-collar workforce.
Well, I remember when I was growing up, it was the smart people went to university and everybody else went to college, and yet I'm pushing my son into college.
David, you're younger than I am, but we're sort of the same vintage. But and Denise, you're younger too, but we're still sort of the same group.
I like to think of myself
but in our time, only about 20% of people graduated from university in the U.S. and Canada. But now it's closer to 50, isn't it?
Right.
So some of this is inevitable.
Some of it's inevitable. It's great. It's great inflation. It's telling the kids that you're right. We were told to go to, but not only were you told to go to university, you were told that nobody flunks. You were told that trying hard is its own reward. You were told that self-esteem at all costs. There's no zeros. There's no consequences.
And this is how the universities became bigger and hired more people, and professors got better tenure.
Right. So there's a big shift now, and I think the youngest millennials who are still in high school are already shifting because they see what happens to their older siblings. And there is a huge surge in college enrollments, or community colleges as they're still called in the US. So it's adapting, but the people that were stuck in the vortex like you are not, they're not, your associates at universities are flailing because you see what's in front of you and it's not exciting.
Audrey, what do you think?
As to the blue-collar jobs, have they not all gone to Asia? Our factories have closed down or relocated where there's cheaper labor. So the blue jobs are really not available particularly either.
We've got to bring them back.
Well, a lot of people are saying that this is a generation that doesn't want to do those jobs and they want something else, and it's creating a burden. This is what people are saying, and we're going to continue to discuss that. In a few minutes, we're going to pay some bills, so back in a sec. Don't go away.
I find it absurd to think that a Sikh person who wears a turban can be elected to Parliament, can be a minister of the Crown, and yet the Quebec government is saying, well, that person can't be a person of authority or can't wear a turban in court or something like that.
They need to be pushed to be able to accomplish certain things they need to do in life. They tend to be lazy.
They're lazy. They like to stay by the computer and the iPads, and that's it.
They're stuck in front of a friggin' internet or a friggin' little game in front of themselves. I started working when I was 14 years old.
I'm a baby boomer, and there's a lot of slackers there, believe me.
They don't want to do anything. They just come in and they want to get paid high and get promoted very high.
Some people don't deserve the jobs they get, but then there's people that really deserve them and don't get them.
They've got masters and stuff. Still can't find jobs these days. It's pretty bad.
When I was 20-something, I could walk into any agency and be employed the next day. And that just doesn't happen for them.
I think there's lots of opportunity out there if you're willing to go and seek it out.
I mean, I'd hate to be a kid starting out trying to get my first house, but then again, I have one kid who just got his first, so it's possible.
Age range and the divide between millennials and boomers. Aaron, you are highly educated and you have a job. How did you do it?
How did I do it? I knew somebody at the organization that I'm at now. A lot of the other jobs that I was applying for, there would have been no way to have even got your resume viewed if you didn't know anybody. I was being told that because the job market was so poor, you had, 500 or 600 people applying for a one-position posting, which is insane.
This is a whole new thing, right, David? This is not the workforce of yesteryear.
No, because the appalling job that's being done in training and preparing kids for the job market, the lack of information, the lack of good information, the irrelevance of a lot of the courses. That's what needs to be reformed. I told my kids, and maybe I shouldn't confess this, I told them when they got ready for university, don't go into anything with the word studies in it.
Gender
studies, this kind of studies. If it's got the word studies, it's a cream puff course and you're never going to get employed.
When it comes to post-secondary education, students are taking on huge debt to try to afford what they want to do. And then what happens afterwards when you graduate and there's no jobs and you can't get into grad school, but you've got this debt, and the unemployment rate is higher than it's been since the Great Depression.
What's the principal grievance of the students who are activists and complain? I mean, what's their chief complaint?
Tuition fees, absolutely.
What do you pay for an undergraduate year?
About $7,500, just below $7,500 for an undergrad. And I started in 2003, and I'm not that old. And my first year, I paid $4,000. It's almost doubled since my first year of school. One of the issues when it comes to post-secondary education is that there's differing prices for different types of, the cost of education differs for what you want to study. I couldn't afford to stay in a computer science program, so that's one of the issues as well. I couldn't afford to stay in the computer science program, so I ended up in something else. Now I'm very happy with what I ended up with, which is sociology and political science, and I'm happy with what I do now.
How are you going to make a living in political science and sociology?
Well, I'm going to make a living as an activist. Don't worry about me.
My motive wasn't worry. My motive was curiosity.
But aren't you, with respect, the students are lobbying. It seems to me, from what looks, you think it's an activist position. I think it's a very conservative position because you're lobbying for relief from tuition fees to perpetuate a bloated, inefficient, ineffective system. So you're saying instead of me paying $7,500 a year, and the baby boomers, 60% of whom are paying the freight for their millennial kids, let's not forget, some of those checks are coming from my generation. And as long as those checks are, you know, like clearing, we don't like feeling guilty about what we're doing. But it seems to me that the pressure should be on the reform of the universities. You're just perpetuating an extortionate cost that's not justified by the results. The results that the universities are producing are ridiculous.
To me, one of the most frightening statistics in the United States right now is that there are 440,000 business graduates every year. Business isn't an academic subject. $200 billion a year is spent. It's a boondoggle to satisfy the egos of captains of industry who are tired of being condescended to by lawyers in particular and other learned professions as if they were a bunch of ignoramuses. And it is essentially public policy and education is a substitute for psychiatry, and we're all going bankrupt as a result of it.
Well, that's Phil.
You're here, absolutely.
David, final point?
The reason it looks intense is that the millennials are not getting launched at the same age that the boomers did. And so everybody's saying, oh my goodness, there's something qualitatively bad or different or uniquely awful about the millennials. But I'm not so sure in this sense. If 80 is the new 60, why shouldn't 30 be the new 20? It's just a part of the reinvention of age. And last week, the British Psychology Association issued new guidelines, I'm serious, redefining adolescence as ending at age 25. So with the stroke of a pen, the millennials are off the hook. It's not your fault. You're still adolescents. You're not adults that aren't getting launched. You're adolescents. So what else can we expect? So, but before we laugh at that, it's actually a serious point that maybe indeed, with all the changes in the economy, with the boomers not retiring because of longer lifespan, underfunding, the boomers are going to be staying and staying and staying and staying in the job market. There's not going to be a glut of new jobs overnight. Maybe we've just got to look at it. Maybe we're going to look back on this and say, I was around at the time that the definitions started to change. I was around at the time that the expectations started to change. And the new norm is you're launched at 30. You're not necessarily launched at 23. And life will go on. It may not be the end of the world.
We're going to say I was around and I was part of that change,
part of that
too.
change.
There you go.
We're
Thanks very much, everybody. We're going to be back in a second with two Bobs, Rae and Blumer. So stay with us. I know you're not going anywhere.
And you know the best part about Zest?
What?
You know what it costs?
What? Nothing! Okay. When I see you with your guests that you're about to interview, like Bob Rae, for example, I'm thinking they're not necessarily going to be on the same side of the fence.
Bob and I have had a long history that started out with a public exchange of extreme acerbities. I won't repeat them. They were very insulting, but pretty humorous. And they're referred to here just in passing. But I really started to admire him when he saved the symphony orchestra here. And of course, he changed parties, and he's in fact a very fine man. And I don't doubt that he always was. We got off to a bad start, but we get on like smoke now. Our guest today is the Honourable Bob Rae, former Premier of Ontario, former acting leader of the Federal Liberal Party, which I believe confers upon you, Bob, an absolutely unique status in Canadian history, does it not?
Being what, former?
Well, you're unique in other ways, but to be the head of the government in one party provincially and the head of another party.
Yeah, I would think probably that's a little unusual, yeah.
Is it a particularly difficult thing to do? I know in your case you didn't just cross the aisle, as some have done, but there were sort of interregna, I think, between your changes.
The short answer to the question is yes, it's a difficult thing to do. It's like going through a divorce. It's like you leave one group of people who've been loyal to you and to whom you've been loyal, and particularly in my case, since I was a party leader in Ontario and had lots of friendships and connections. But it was a gradual departure. I mean, when I left politics in '96 after the government was defeated, I began to do more teaching, began to do more writing, began to do more speaking out.
You saved the symphony orchestra.
So I did a bunch of stuff like that. I felt more and more that there were fewer and fewer people who were defending what I tried to do, what we tried to do as a government, and that my own thinking wasn't really evolving that much, but that the NDP was returning to type.
Why did you leave the Liberals in the first place?
Well, I suppose in some ways it's a good question. My life might have been a lot easier if I hadn't done that. But I guess it was partly my own experiences in the UK, my sense that Mr. Stephen Lewis was leader of the party when I came back to Canada, went to law school, was engaged with the Steelworkers Union. Just a whole lot of things came together, and being part of the NDP just seemed more natural at that point.
If we could keep broadly to the political theme here.
Yes, sir.
It's quite topical. Michael Ignatieff's book has come out. I'm not trying to stir up controversy here, but he claimed that you objected to his entering public life at his age and the way he did it and so forth. I mean, do you want to comment on how truthful his account is?
I don't particularly want to engage down that path, but I felt that it was a difficult thing to do, to be away for such a long time and come back and essentially try to lead the party. I thought it was a hard jump, and told him so.
And so it proved to be.
Well, I think that's the case. But I mean, you never win marks with friends when you tell them something that they really don't necessarily want to.
It's like telling a guy you don't like his girlfriend.
Well, whatever. But I mean, it's not an easy thing to do.
But are your personal relations with him reparable, or are they in abeyance?
I think you'd say they're in abeyance. I think that's a very good way of putting it. I don't choose to I'm not going to write a tell-all book about my experiences over the last 5 or 6 years. I suppose I could if I wanted to, but I don't want to do that.
Would you comment on the current leader?
He has a ton of natural talent, and he has a ton of resilience. And I would say in assessing leaders, we much overestimate a whole lot of other qualities, and we underestimate the issues of resilience and character. He can take a punch and he can deliver a punch, and I think he's going to be Prime Minister. There's a craving, I think, in Canada for leadership that is not deeply ideological, that brings people together, and that makes people feel better about the country and about the situation in which we find ourselves. And I think Justin can do that better, certainly better than the other two, and I would argue, based on what I've seen in politics, better than just about anybody else.
Can we talk for a minute about what you're up to right now?
Sure.
You appear to be chiefly preoccupied with the Native Peoples question.
They find themselves now in the center of economic development in Northern Ontario, where there's been a major mineral discovery of chromite and other things, gold, and some geologists say it's the biggest find after the Sudbury Basin find 100 years ago. So the question, I was asked by the First Nation communities, with chiefs, if I would represent them in discussions with Ontario about how are we going to do this? How is this development going to happen? And Frank Yakibuchi, the former Supreme Court judge, is representing the province. So he and I are having discussions.
But that should be a productive, civilized exchange leading to a good arrangement for everybody.
Should, and you hope it will. But there's a lot of challenges, and it's not easy.
Can you give us just obviously the barest outline of what you have in mind?
I mean, we're dealing with a population that's had its challenges in terms of the number of First Nations people in jail, the number of people who have been unable to get work, the number of people who've been off work or out of the labor market stream for a long time. So we've got a lot to do to get people ready. And then we've got to make sure that people actually can get the jobs and get the work that's available. And then we've got to see that the way this development is done is as sustainable as it can be. The big change that's happening in the Aboriginal community today, I don't think enough people understand that, is that there is a deep, deep interest in economic development, and there's a deep demand for partnership. And there's a very human demand for respect.
Bob, you've been one of the leading advocates and players in the whole area of human rights in this country for a great many years. Would you comment on the Charter of Values now being discussed in Quebec?
I think it's wrong-headed. I think it's wrong to think that government should get into the business of telling people how to dress. We don't have a dress code in this country. The second thing is, I think even more fundamental, is that I find it absurd to think that a Sikh person who wears a turban can be elected to Parliament, can be a Minister of the Crown, and yet the Quebec government is saying, well, that person can't be a person of authority or can't wear a turban in court or something like that. What Quebec is saying is, we will decide how you have to look and behave in order to be in a position of any authority in our province, in our jurisdiction.
Bob, it is a great thing for Canada that you're still active and still pitching in, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Conrad. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
There was lots more to that interview, I know.
Yep.
Well, you can see that if the whole interview online, go to Vision TV or the zoomertv.com. So good job on that one. And look who's joined us, Bob Blumer, author, TV host, surrealist chef. Welcome, Bob. You brought gifts. I love a guest who comes to a dinner party with gifts.
Brought,
what have you got?
Very nice bottle of wine. This is
I happen to have an empty glass.
Canadian wine that's produced on Pelee Island, down in the most southerly tip of Canada.
Where all the birds are.
Where all the birds are, and monarch butterflies.
The very few that we have left, the monarch butterflies.
Made a pilgrimage.
They've gone to Oklahoma, though. They made it.
Well, I don't know if a lot of them made it. They didn't even do the count in Pelee Island this year because there were so few to count. I'm worried about the butterflies.
Go down all right? Are screw top wines? You're right to worry about the monarch butterfly.
And the bees.
He wants to know if the screw top wines go down.
He does, yeah.
Yes, they do. I mean, there's a wine in California, Plumpjack, that they bottle a $100 wine in a screw top. It's actually great. You know, 5% of wine that's sold is tainted by corks. So if you have a beautiful bottle of something you've been saving for a long time, you open it up after all that time, all the anticipation, and it's one of that 5% that's corked, done. So when you have a screw top, you know you're not going to have a problem with that. So it's really, and it's interesting because they package in the States, you know, they have $2 chuck, and they package that with corks. It's actually, it's a plastic cork, but they do that because people still associate value with cork. But ask anybody who's a big
And it's recorking, isn't it? If you just have half a bottle, don't they think that a cork is better than a cap to preserve the taste?
It's all the same.
That's a myth?
It's a myth.
It's important dining tips, though, I must say.
This is a beautiful wine, though. I just want to tell you, it's
lovely.
It's very luscious. There's a lot of, it's a Gewürztraminer. So there's a lot of lychee. It's a bit sweet, a little bit acid, and it's all of $11. It's like amazing mouthfeel. Big
Fantastic. You're not going to take the rest of that bottle with you, are you?
No, I
Okay, so Bob is going to be doing some cooking for us here on the show. We just had Thanksgiving weekend. Now, Bob and I have known each other for a long time. I actually have all his books at home, and I cook from them.
Collect them.
And I collect them all. And we've just been through Thanksgiving, and all the turkey's done. We've made all our stew. And I've been to your house before. You're a really good cook. You know how to cook for one or for two. Great meals, simply priced, and delicious. And for
I
just
didn't charge you much.
You didn't charge me much. Okay, we're going to be back in a minute. Bob's going to cook for us. Stay with us. Want to come and cook for us? Bob Blumer. What are we doing? What is this man versus can thing? I assume because I'm not the man that I'm the can. Is that it?
Well, you do have control of the can, yes.
Okay.
Well, you know, if I had a nickel for everybody who came up to me and they said, you know, they just don't have time to cook when they come home from work or they've been doing things or whatever, and they don't have, they think that there's not enough time to make dinner, right? But I like to think that it doesn't really take very much time at all, and that if you have enough time to heat up a can of SpaghettiOs, you have enough time to make dinner from scratch. So to prove my point,
I'm ready.
You have the can of SpaghettiOs.
Thank you. I got the hard job. Yeah.
You have a pan here, so I make a fresh pasta in the amount of time you have.
I saw you in Idea City.
That's right.
Yeah, you were fantastic.
So I thought that we would up the ante this time, and instead of just making a pasta in less time than it takes you to heat up this can of SpaghettiOs, I'm going to take a piece of Ontario whitefish, and I have some beautiful spinach here. I'm going to saute the spinach. I'm going to pan-sear the whitefish, get a really nice crust on it, and I'm going to attempt, now I've never done this on live television before, says the magician. I'm going to attempt to make this in the amount of time that it takes you to heat this up. Now, in fairness, it should be noted that I have a pot of boiling water and a hot pan.
And I noticed that my elements aren't on. Right.
We'll fire you up.
Okay.
Okay?
Handicapped, perhaps.
So, audience want to count us down? 3, 2, okay. And we're off. So
there you go.
Oh, now, one little stipulation. That has to be boiling, okay? Not just not on the outsides, but all the way through.
I'm working the one-handed can opener. It's a new invention. Very good.
So the first thing I've done here is I've taken my spinach and I'm blanching it in a little bit of water, which is a classic little Italian trick.
I think I've been doubly handicapped. Okay.
Okay, so I'm putting a little bit of butter in the pan.
Right.
A little bit of oil.
Steph should never lick their fingers. Okay.
Very nice. And I'm putting my seasoned fish skin side down. Just takes a second to blanch the spinach, and it's going to soften it up. You know when you get that really sort of velvety smooth spinach in a
Love spinach, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move this over. Put another pan on.
It's a very boring thing, this stirring the
Yes, we'll see this
noodles.
So much more fun when you're cooking, and that's why...
That's a little hot, don't you think?
It is a little bit hot, but you know what? I want to get a really nice crust on that skin. Look at that. You know, that's nice. You get that beautiful crisp.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Sorry, I was showing off my noodles.
Fall for the old...
Yeah. There it is. Mine's going to be fantastic when it's done.
Now, by the by, when you're setting up a kitchen, if you want to be able to cook quickly at home, you want to have your kitchen armed and dangerous, right? So when you walk in, you want to have a cutting board that's already set up. You want to entrench it. You want to surround it with all your go-to utensils, things you use the most. Ideally, take your knives, put your knives on a magnet right in front. Have all your go-to ingredients surrounding your workstation so that when you walk into the kitchen, the moment you step into the kitchen, you're cooking. A lot of people, you know, by the time they've finished taking out all their pots, their pans, their knives, their cutting board and all of that,
There's a lot of time.
I finished dinner.
I could have had a glass of wine by the time all that came out. That's true. No, what I love about your books is you have a lot of lists about things that you should have in your larder, in your pantry, ready to go.
You know, I always keep a block of Parmesan, some eggs. I always keep citrus, oranges, lemons, limes, not only to use the juice, but I use the zest. Zest gives you tons of flavor, and you get that, obviously, the zestiness. And you know the best part about zest?
What?
You know what it costs?
What?
Nothing!
Okay.
It's fun.
We wasn't even set
We gotta have a
that
show.
up. Okay, we
so watch this. I just have a little bit of oil in the pan, a little bit of spinach. I could have used frozen spinach. This fish is practically done.
Beautiful.
See, you're still heating this up.
You handicapped me, Blumer. It's warm though. Okay. Almost there.
Almost there. But see, look at that. Look at the beautiful crust I have on the skin here. Now you can take a filet like this, wrap it individually, put it in your freezer. I always keep a baguette in my freezer, take off a chunk, throw that in the oven, crisp it up, cook my fish. My spinach just needs a little bit of seasoning here, a little bit of pepper, a little salt.
You really use your freezer. So these are good tips for coming home and, you know, I go home and I buy a whole loaf of bread. I don't want to use the whole loaf of bread.
No, if you haven't used it all,
right?
then just put it in the freezer.
Yeah, in the freezer. Okay.
So, I don't know how you're doing there, but I'm done.
I've been handicapped
So, and by the way, this whole meal, if you were to shop for this, with the exception of the staples, would cost you about $7 or $8.
Wow. And this can of spaghetti, you can get it for $1.49. I'm ready, by the way. Ba-da-da.
Very nice.
Ta-da-da. Thank you.
So one last little trick here. This is the cheap and easy presentation trick. Lemon slice.
Right.
It's all in the wrist action.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
There you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Blumer. Well done. So this recipe and lots more is on.
Stop the clock.
I think you beat. This recipe and lots more is on our site at thezoomertv.com, and you can find out how to get Bob's books there. And when we come back, Conrad's Talk Black. Well done. Thank you. Can I eat it now?
Sir Winston Churchill drank prodigiously, was overweight for 60 years, and said that he occasionally thought of taking exercise, but lay down, cigar and brandy in hand, until the thought passed.
For Bob Blumer here. That looks absolutely delicious. Conrad, are you a good cook?
I'm afraid not.
No? Not at all? You must be able to make
Toast.
Toast.
I must add my small and quavering voice to those who, in keeping with the leaders of this network, are waving the banner of those who in earlier times would be thought past their prime. It is not necessary to be hyperactive, absurd, or almost psychotic in pursuit of perpetual youth, only prudent in the avoidance of bad things and sufficiently respectful of one's physical self to avoid practices that notoriously shorten our lives. Sir Winston Churchill drank prodigiously, was overweight for 60 years, and said that he occasionally thought of taking exercise, but lay down, cigar and brandy in hand, until the thought passed. He lived to be 90.
I think I'm going off in search of a cigar and a brandy, actually, and a place to lie down.
I deliberately tried to seem sedentary and elderly and not as sprightly as I really am.
Oh, totally, absolutely. You fooled everyone. That's good. Next week, we're going to talk about Zoomer sex, and you can help us shape the show, of course, by going to our website, thezoomertv.com, and Vision TV's Facebook page, or tweet at thezoomertv. You're a great tweeter, I know that. The online poll question is, should retirement homes be supporting healthy sexual relations between their single residents? So that's it for our show. Good night. I think we had some fun. There you go. We have the answer right there.